Aye, shepherd's pie. Greetings from the Philippines. Welcome back to the kitchen for a coffee and a chat. Now, today I thought we would talk about a subject which I know is close to a lot of people's hearts, and that is plans to retire in the Philippines and the finances that are involved. Because if you're thinking about retiring to the Philippines, it's bloody important. You need to know, can you afford to do it? How much money do you need? And it's a subject that I have covered in the past. I made a video similar to this a few months back. So why am I doing it again? I'm doing it because my opinions have changed on a couple of aspects, because I've been here longer now. I'm older and wiser, I would like to think. And equally, quite a few people have joined the channel recently who probably haven't seen that video. And it's 2025. Living costs have increased. You know, the calculations of a year back might not be the same as they are today. So anyway, that's what we're doing today. Now, when you talk about retirement, and a lot of people do, I know it's a subject that's covered a lot on YouTube, it always surprises me with the contrasting views and the contradictory statements people will make. Some people will tell you you can retire on an extraordinarily low amount of money, and others will project these astronomical figures that the vast majority of people in the world could never hope to achieve. Now, I'm going to try and be kind of in the middle here. I'm going to be as honest as I can be. It's impossible for me to tell you as an individual how much you need to retire, because I don't know you. I don't know your lifestyle. I don't know your situation, your constants in terms of financial dependence, etc. So all I'm going to try and do now is outline the kind of lifestyle you can expect to be able to live on certain budgets. I'm also going to outline the way I look at what you need, or the way I calculate my emergency funds, etc. The way I forecast how much I need to retire myself. It's not financial advice. You know, I'm no expert. I'm just, chewing the fat with you, telling you how I came to my calculations and how, based on my lifestyle in the Philippines, or in Asia in general, because I'm in my second year in the Philippines, but I'm in my 11th year in Asia. And my living costs have basically been roughly the same in Cambodia, Thailand, and the Philippines. So anyway, that's your introduction done. Let's look at some of the meat on the bone, the actual expenses. Now, let's talk emergency funds to start off with, because you do need emergency funds. That's a given. And I would strongly recommend that you take out a decent insurance policy or have private insurance. Now, that's quite doable for me at my age. I fully understand that in later years, when I get to my late 60s, 70s, etc., insurance costs can come prohibitive. To a lot of people, or maybe not prohibitive if you've got big funds, but just not cost effective. So you need to go down the self-insuring route. Now, that's a bridge you will have to cover when you get to that stage. But that is something that I am fully expecting to have to do myself. And I'll explain what my thoughts are when I get to that stage. But fortunately, I'm not at that point yet. And I'm assuming that the vast majority of you won't be, because I'm assuming I'm talking to people who want to retire early, who have the ability to keep saving and make lifestyle choices that will allow them to retire early. Obviously, if you're in your later years, your late 60s, 70s, then that ship sails, you've already retired. So your funds are what you've got, you've either got emergency funds or you haven't. But this video will still hopefully be of use to you, because I'll give you an idea of what your living costs will be when you come over here. But anyway, I've digressed there. I've gone off on a tangent. So you see a lot of big figures in terms of the self-insurance. I have seen people over here say that you need to have at least $200,000 in the bank as emergency funds or self-insurance funds to cover accidents or anything that can happen. Let's push the self-insurance aside for a moment and let's talk about emergency funds. I have access in terms of emergency, as in money I could get to straight away. I've always got about £50,000 that I could get to straight away. Wouldn't have to sell any shares or whatever. It's just there in ISAs, as we say in the UK, that I could get out. £50,000, or I should have worked out the maths. That's probably about, let's say, $65,000. You know, someone will correct me in the calculations, but that's what I have. Would I be comfortable living overseas with less than that in terms of emergency funds? Yeah, I probably would. I think, yeah, you know, it depends on your situation, but, you know, maybe 20,000 is enough. It depends on what insurance policy you've got. Now, I did an interview with a chap a while back who was an insurance broker, and he recommended that if you had approximately £1 million pesos in coverage or insurance, that would cover you for virtually everything in terms of an accident. It's not going to cover you for ongoing cancer costs or things like that, but it would cover you if you had an operation, if you were in hospital for a few weeks because you'd smashed things up, etc., etc. So working on that, if you've got that and you've got, say, £20,000, which I think would be about $25,000, then yeah, there's 1.2526 at the moment to the pound. So 20,000 would be $25,000. So if I'm saying I've got 50,000, that's $60,000 access to. And I've always kind of had that. I always kind of keep that amount out of investments and things just for emergencies, but I've never ever had to use it. I've never had to dip into my emergency funds. Praise the Lord. And I tell a lie, I haven't always had that, because the funds have grown over the years because they're in ISAs. So probably I'm going back a bit now. When I first moved to Thailand, I had probably about £20,000 in funds I could access, but I had insurance as well. Now, anyone who watches the channel knows I've got property in the UK. So if, God forbid, I had a catastrophic accident, the 50,000 wasn't enough, I was stuck out here, then I could sell a house. Now, I don't think I would have to, because I've got investments and shares, but I'd sell shares first, because the house is my main income. But the point is, you know, I don't really worry about this happening, because by hook or by crook, I can cover the costs, you know, unless we went into the millions, which we're not going to realistically, are we? And if we do, well, you know, what can you do about that? So that's what I personally believe, if you've got something around the $20,000, $30,000 mark, let's say $40,000 mark, anything above that, I think that's fine in emergency funds. As long as you're viewing it as emergency funds, as long as you're not going to be dipping into that each month, because if you are, it's not emergency funds, it's part of your lifestyle. Get that, whack it in a high interest account or a passive fund, investment fund or something like that. It will grow as time goes on. So that's what I think about emergency money. In terms of self-insuring for the future, you know, I'm not sure how you do that, because the reality is, I've always taken the view that when I have to start self-insuring, I will aim to have as much money as I can in terms of for an accident or an emergency or something like that. But if I get, God forbid, cancer or something serious, or dementia or something, you know, along those lines, then I expect I'll go back to the UK. I mean, it's impossible to know what your mindset will be when that happens, but when I'm planning my finances, I'd go back to the UK. Now, I know some people will say, yeah, but you're not covered, you lose your health coverage, etc., because you've been out of the country. Look, in reality, you don't. I know a lot of people who've gone back for operations and all sorts of things. I have never, when I've been to a GP, ever been asked how long, if I've been out of the country for a length of period or whatever. There may be a rule, but it's not enforced. And even if it was enforced, as I understand it, once you're back in the UK, you qualify after 3 months. So these things aren't going to stop you moving back, you know, if you have to in the future. And that's the way I've always looked at when I do my calculations, whether I could afford to retire, whether I can afford to live overseas. I have always based it on, when I've done my forecasts, could I afford to live in the UK? Could I afford to live comfortably in the UK if I had to, on my future pensions, on my savings, on my investments? Because if the answer is yes, it means two things. It means I can have peace of mind. I don't really need to worry about the future in terms of my health. What will be, but I will have access to, touchwood, great healthcare. NHS, in my opinion, is a wonderful organisation. They've looked after a number of close family members who've had very serious life-threatening illnesses over the last few years, and they've looked after them fantastically. I know you hear horror stories, but on the whole, I think the NHS is great, and hopefully, new government, new investment, they'll build it back up again. So that is the way I look at that aspect, because if you start looking at what it will be, I'm going to come back there. I'm not going to stop the video. This is raw. I got a bit of a word salad then. The other plus of looking at it that way is, at the end of the day, the UK is more expensive than living in Asia. I mean, obviously Singapore, Southeast Asia is probably more expensive than the UK, but certainly cost of living in Thailand, yeah, it's going up. Cost of living in the Philippines is going up. God, the whole of Asia, but it's nowhere near, it is not as expensive as it is in the UK. And I very, very, very much doubt it ever will be. Certainly not in my lifetime. So if you can afford, if you're sure in your forecast that you can live comfortably in the UK, then you've got enough to retire to Asia. You know, simple as that. Because if you do it the other way, you start thinking, well, how much do I need to live in Cambodia, or how much do I need to live in the Philippines? We're talking about the Philippines now, so I'll stick with the Philippines. Then it can become tricky because you're not sure of certain constants. And if you only bargain for having enough to live in the Philippines, well then, if your health does go south and you need to leave, you're going to be potentially in financial dire straits when you get back to your home country, depending on what your home country is. Obviously, some countries, European countries, generally have free healthcare. Other countries, United States, for example, don't. But I can't help you with that. That's just the way it is. I'm just saying that's the way I've always looked at it. I wouldn't feel comfortable thinking, right, calculating, I need X amount for the foreseeable future, rest of my days in the Philippines, because unforeseen circumstances and all that, I might not be in the Philippines. I probably won't be in the Philippines. A lot of people know I love Thailand. I'll probably be back in Thailand. But I always did the same when I forecast Thailand. I was not going to imagine that I only needed this because that's what it costs to live in Thailand, because the reality is that probably wouldn't be enough to go and live back in the UK. So that is the way that I look at it. Because, and some people won't like that. I know it's just advice, it's not even advice, it's just the way I look at it. There were certain people in the comments when I made this video last time saying, well, if we looked at it that way, then we would never have enough money to retire overseas. Well, there's two answers to that. One, don't look at it that way then. Plough your own field. Don't have to listen to what I do. But equally, maybe you don't have enough money to retire in Asia in the first place. And there are a lot of people who do retire overseas early who don't have enough money and they come unstuck. Hopefully you won't be one of those people. So that's the way I look at it. And I think you have to, in the sense that some people seem to have it in their minds they will never go back to their home country. So these seem to be the people who believe you need several $100,000 in the bank as emergency funds to basically cover your self-insurance when you get sick, if you get cancer, etc. Well, if you go down that route, how much is enough? How can you ever know? What if you have 10, 15 years of battling cancer? The money could run out. You know, if you've got dementia, it ceases to become a conversation just about money. It's, can you trust that you will have the best guardians over here, etc. So anyway, there are a million reasons why I calculate it that way, why it makes sense to me, and I've just outlined them. Now, if you are going to go down the hundreds of thousands route because you're going to try and self-insure, you're going to have your long-term treatment over here, etc., power to you. But that's going to put a lot of people off. If you're going to say in a video you must have that for that, then you know you're talking to a very small audience of people that can do that. I mean, I might end up in that route. I mean, my plan is, you know, I'm quite lucky in terms of the property. There comes a time when I will start selling the houses off. I've got no family or children to leave them to. So in about 10 years' time, I will sell a property and possibly build a house somewhere. You know, I will probably sell another property and use that to be my self-insurance, you know. But as I say, you can't, not everyone's in that situation. And, you know, best laid plans are mice and men. You never know how things are going to work out. I mean, that is just roughly how I plan to do things, intend to now, but things could change. Anyway, I think we've done that bit to death. So you need your emergency funds. You need to consider self-insurance as you get older. Let's look at budgets, because I do think this is the most appropriate way to do this, because, you know, everyone's lifestyle is different. Your biggest expense over here is probably going to end up being the person you end up with. That is an unfortunate reality of the Philippines. Not everyone. I'm not in that situation. Got a few friends that aren't in that situation. But the point I'm getting at is very few guys come here and don't end up in a relationship. And very often that relationship will have baggage. It will have additional costs. It will have dependence, etc. Which, let's face it, a lot of guys end up paying for. So with the best will in the world, you can watch a cost of living video and you can calculate for this and for that and for this. But if you end up with a partner like that or in a situation like that, then it all goes out the window. You know, unless you break the relationship off, those cost of living videos you watch and the budget you set for yourself is an irrelevance. So you need to consider that. And it happens to a lot of people. There's a lot of people out here could live for X amount, but they're spending twice as much just because of the relationship they're in. It's the reality of life in the Philippines. Their choice. If they're happy doing it, power to them. If they're unhappy, well, heart goes out to them. Change something. So let's look at $1,000 a month. Can you live on $1,000 in a month comfortably? We're talking US dollars in the Philippines. Yeah, you can. You can. I have. But remember, you've got to have the emergency fund on top of that. Because that's not going to be enough if you get sick or you have a problem or something happens, you have an accident. But living on $1,000 a month, yeah, you can do it. I would say better to aim for $1,500 a month, because that gives you the leeway without going into your emergency funds, because there will be additional expenses. I was watching a video of a guy on a new channel, and he was basically saying that I think he'd been here a year and it was impossible to live on what he budgeted because every month there was an additional cost, an emergency, and just the way it was. Well, I hear you, brother. That happens to some people. Touch wood, I've been very lucky. I have not needed any emergency funds. There haven't been any unexpected expenses in all the time I've been in the Philippines, apart from one where I had to buy a phone, a mobile phone. Can't think of any others. But it had happened to him every month. I've been lucky, he's been unlucky. Who knows, next month I could have lots of additional expenses. But I'm not including additional expenses. I'm not including purchases like bikes and cars and things in your monthly living costs, because I think you need to. I think they're one-off costs and they're different. So let's say you need a $20,000, $40,000 emergency fund. If you're planning on coming here long term, you're going to need to allow a couple of thousand at least dollars for setup costs. Obviously, if you're planning on buying a car, etc., they'll grow. I'm talking about the minimum here, because your first couple of months are going to be more expensive than the following months, because you're invariably going to be moving around from hotel and Airbnbs until you find somewhere to live, etc. So yeah, you need to budget that. If you've got $1,500 a month, you'll probably be all right for that. But for $1,000, you can live an okay lifestyle. I'd say a great lifestyle, really. I think I'm living a great lifestyle. I'm comfortable, very happy. When I made the video before, I said, you're going to have certain economies. You're going to have to economise on this. You have to economise on that. Because I thought you did. But you don't really. We're not economising. And based on our living costs, they fluctuate between $1,000 and $15,000 a month. They go up and down. I've only had 1 month, I think, in the Philippines, or maybe two, where it's been $2,000 a month when I was in Siquijor. But they've been counterbalanced by the several months I've had less than $1,000. So for me, $1,500 a month US is fine. That we're not economising, we're going out. People who watch the channel will know, usually 5 times a week, sometimes 6, always at least 4. And we're enjoying life, and we're doing it for less than $1,500 a month. It is what it is. You know, we eat what we eat, we do what we want to do. But that will depend where you're living. You know, it's going to be harder to do that in Cebu, harder to do that in Manila, the more expensive places, but it's doable. I've been told, reliably informed by people in the comments, that you can do it in any city here, and you probably can. Now, some people will say the Philippines is expensive. Some people will say, you know, they're living on $1,000 in New York or whatever in America. Well, you know, power to them if they are, but they're not going out 4 or 5 times a week, I can tell you that. You couldn't do that. You can't have the same kind of lifestyle in your home country, Western country. I think any Western country than you can in somewhere like the Philippines. Yeah, you can live on limited funds. People do. You can have an okay lifestyle, but you're not going to go out as much as you do in the Philippines. I think that's just a given. But yeah, for $1,500 a month, you can live an okay lifestyle in most places. You can have a decent standard of living, depending on your partner. If you end up in a partner where you've got lots of financial commitments because of her, then it's going to push your living costs up. If you're going to want to eat in Western restaurants every day, eat Western food, you know, go to the coffee shops and things, etc., then that's going to push your living costs up. But even if you were doing that as a single guy, $1,500 a month in Dumaguete, I think, would still cover you. But if you have a partner and you've got some financial commitments and you're eating in Western restaurants and things, that's probably going to push you into the next bracket, which we will say the $1,500 to $2,500 bracket. Now, when you get to that bracket, and again, we're talking your living costs, we're not, you know, monthly living costs, we're not talking about emergency funds or anything like that, they're all separate. Once you get to the $1,500 to $2,500 mark. I think in most places in the Philippines, you can rent a decent place. It's not going to be, you know, a fantastic villa with a swimming pool and all that kind of stuff, unless you luck out and find somewhere. As long as your partner doesn't have too many financial commitments, you could be living a pretty good lifestyle then, you know, pretty decent. And when I say good, I don't think it would be better than ours. What I mean is, if you want a Western lifestyle, if you want your coffee shops, if you want they're not for me, but if you want to do that kind of thing, if you want to eat out purely in Western restaurants, you don't want to eat Filipino food, you want to get a maid, for example. You know, you want to live in slightly better accommodation. Maybe you want a place with a swimming pool in a shared compound, a gated community or whatever. Well, once you get up to past the 1,500, 2,500 mark, that is definitely doable in Dumaguete, 100%. I would say doable in the vast majority of towns and cities in the Philippines. Probably doable in Manila, Cebu, etc. Depending on where you know, because obviously there's levels, you know, of where you want to live. But you certainly won't be have to economising. You know, when you're in that bracket, you shouldn't have to be. If you are and you're going over your budget, etc., then I'd be surprised, unless it's you're supporting daughters and uncles and cousins and extended family members. But you know, you'd have a decent lifestyle then. Once you get past the 2,500, once you get to the 3,500, I don't think you really have to worry much then. I mean, I'm not going to keep going because, you know, the video will go on forever. What do you get to the 4,500 mark, the 5,500 mark? But if you're budgeting on having around 3,000 plus a month, then you should be good to go with the Philippines. I mean, don't get me wrong. You hear people that's not enough. You get people. I'll get people in the comments saying they spend $1,000 a week on this. You know, well, some of them will. A lot of them are fantasists. You know, it's easy to make up some rock and roll lifestyle. You know, when you're on YouTube. But yeah, you're not. And again, so we're not talking about emergency funds. We're not talking about this. We're talking about your pension budget. You know, because I still get some people that are going to, even though I've covered this to death in this video, there will always be some people who say, yeah, but you haven't covered this and you haven't thought of that. Well, I think we have. We've said you've got to have X amount as an emergency fund. You know, if you're going to self-insure, you need to have this, etc. We're just talking about you know, we've talked about your setup costs, your car and your, you know, scooter if you buy one and all this kind of stuff. But you don't have to do those. Don't have to buy a car. I haven't bought a car. Don't have to buy a scooter. If you're living in Cebu City, for example, you don't need a scooter. I mean, I rented a scooter for a long time. So these don't need to be setup costs. If they were your setup costs, that's because you chose to have them. I've never really had setup costs in any country. I've just gradually broken into it. You know, over time, I've bought this or bought that. I certainly haven't gone to a place and thought, right, I need to buy this, I need to buy that, I need to buy that, I need to buy that. Because I don't take that view. Because I never know how long I'm going to stay in a place. You know, I'm not going to move to somewhere like this, rent a house, buy a fridge, buy an oven, buy all this stuff and that, because they're not stuff you can take with you if you move on. You know, it's but some people are different. Some people commit early and playing the long game. I take every day as it comes. But that's just me. But realistically, as I say, once you get to if you've got more than $3,000 a month, I don't think you need to worry about anything. I mean, wives will always help you spend it. I mean, that's just the way of the world. You know, obviously, if you want to go out for $200 a month, you know, $200 a night meals every day of the week, then, you know, you're going to go over that. But it's very difficult to do in Dumaguete. There aren't, that I know of, any $200 restaurants here. So I'm saying to you, it is, I mean, you could do that. If you live the rock and roll lifestyle in Manila, I'm sure $3,000 wouldn't be enough. But who at later retirement age or our age wants to live that lifestyle? And if you do, then very few people can afford to retire and live like that. You need to have an online business. You need to keep working over here if you want to do that kind of thing. So yeah, I think I've done this video to death. As I say, Can you live on $1,000 a month? Yes, you can. I would aim for 1,500. Beauty of aiming for 1,500 when you're planning your finances is the months that you don't reach the 1,500 mark, the month that you're around 1,000, then you can invest that back in savings. The money's building. You can use it to buy something in the future. Because if you're only aiming to have $1,000 a month, I know some people can do that. Not for me. I wouldn't want to live like that. As I've said, in the past, the months we've only spent 1,000, it is because it's what our costs have been. Now, if I only had $1,000, I'd be constantly, can we afford to do this? Can we afford it? It would drive me nuts. So it's incidental that our costs have been that low. I wouldn't want to personally retire only having $1,000 a month. That won't work for me at all. I wouldn't want to retire only having $1,500 a month. But that's just me. And I'm talking to people who are calculating that. If you are in a situation where that's all you've got, then that's all you've got. That's the reality. When you come to the Philippines, are you going to have to budget from time to time? Are you going to have to be careful with your money? Yes, you are. But I'm sure you're having to be incredibly careful in your home country. So, it's not going to be anything new to you if that's all you've got in terms of funds. Budgeting will have become a way of life to you. Now, again, as I've said many times, I'm not trying to sell the Philippines on anyone. If you don't want to retire, you don't think you've got enough money, don't do it. For God's sake, stay where you are. I'm just, for those who are thinking about it, I'm just trying to give my honest take on what it costs. So, yeah, there we go. 1,000 to 1,500, you can do it. 2,500, 1,500, 2,500, you can do it with bells on. You can live comfortably and not really have to worry about too much. Obviously, you still have to keep an eye on your bank balance occasionally. Can live probably anywhere that you want to, realistically. Once we get past the 2,500, 3,000 mark, you can live anywhere you want to in the Philippines. And you can have a decent lifestyle, you can have a good house, and you can go shopping and not look at the bills. That's what I would suggest. You can go out for restaurants and not need to worry about the costs on the menu. But to be fair, we're in that situation here because nothing costs that much in the Philippines. I can think, a few times in the last month, I've ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, which has been a tomahawk steak, because I went through a stage when I was obsessed with those. And 590 pesos in the Kingswick. I think it was 545 pesos in the native resto bar. So they are, they're the most expensive things on the menu. There aren't, beef Wellingtons for 4,000 pesos on the menu, or bottles of wine for 10,000 pesos in the bars and restaurants in Dumaguete. It's just not a thing. So anyway, there you go. Right. Hope you found this helpful. I know I went around in circles. I'm not the most organised person, but hey, that's just the way it is. If you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, it would be marvellous if you did. But whether you do, whether you don't, stay safe, be lucky.